Archmage Antonidas is one of the most iconic cards in Hearthstone, a legendary mage card that instilled fear in the opponents whenever summoned because they knew once he was on the board, it is game over.
Aha!
Now, imagine how happy I was once I saw that a new version of the card was being released.
You require my assistance?
The card, in my opinion, was supposed to highlight the newly added spell school system in Hearthstone. Before the update and Forged in the Barrens, spells had no tags to separate them from one another. Similar to minion tribes, Blizzard introduced spell schools in order to give each class more mechanics and synergies as well as new options for building decks. So Grand Magus Antonidas is added to the game, and he is supposed to be the cool, powerful wizard that is the ultimate payoff card for playing a Fire Mage deck. The class fantasy is on point, the character is very well known, the effect seems awesome. What could go wrong? Well, it turns out that the cards that had to give us cool fire combos were just not that strong. The engine of the Fire Mage deck was supposed to be the Sanctum Chandler, but there was a small problem, or rather a few problems. The most obvious one, the card costs 5 mana, which is incredibly high for its effect that demands you to play more cards on the same turn. And I'm saying that you need to play cards on the same turn because the chances of this card surviving turn 5 are slim to none. So you have to pay 5 mana and then you need more mana to cast fire spells. If you play this on turn 5, you basically have one option: to cast a 0 mana spell called Hot Streak and then cast another fire spell for 2 or less mana, since Hot Streak reduces the cost of your next spell by 2. Notice how convoluted that sounds? You spend your whole turn 5 on playing an average minion in terms of stats and then using your mana reduction fire spell synergy just to draw 2 cards. Well, why wouldn't you? Just use Arcane Intellect instead, which draws you 2 cards for 3 mana. Logic would dictate that having such specific requirements, such as casting spells from a certain spell school, would be more rewarding since you are supposed to build your whole deck around limiting factors. Not only that, but the synergy itself is not that strong, which is the most bizarre thing about the Sanctum Chandler. I don't know if you've noticed, but the card effect says that after casting a fire spell, you draw a spell, which means you may draw a card that is from a different spell school. And that would ruin your potential combo, which in a perfect world would be casting multiple fire spells one after another and thinning your deck in the process. So you are basically hoping that randomness would work in your favor. You may say that you just have to make sure that your deck has only fire in it. That's a fair point, so let's examine how you could do this. The answer is simple at first glance: Ignite. Ignite shuffles another copy of Ignite in your deck that is even stronger. So on paper, you would play your elemental, then start casting Ignite. Then draw your newly shuffled Ignite, and so on and so on. The only problem, however, is that in order to do this consistently, you would need to have your deck almost empty. Otherwise, you run the risk of drawing a spell that is not Ignite. And that brings me back to another point that was made earlier. The whole Fire Mage synergy and combo potential was too convoluted and awkward to play. High mana cost, inconsistent, and very vulnerable to bad luck. We're talking about the draw engine of the deck, which normally is supposed to be the best functioning part of a deck, the glue that holds it together. Now, with all that said, you may think to yourself, okay, I get it. The engine of the Fire Mage deck is bad. But what about the payoff? What about Grand Magus Antonidas? The card must be super powerful, right? Wrong. Let me explain. Grand Magus Antonidas is supposed to be the big finisher of the Fire Mage deck. And it can be, except that the card is too fair in the Hearthstone meta that has been developing over the recent years. For 8 mana, you cast 3 fireballs, which is great. However, the fireballs do not target the enemy hero. They can target any enemy minion, which means that you are left hoping to have good luck once again. Not only that, but originally the fireballs didn't get buffed by spell damage on board, so you were casting 6 damage fireballs. Despite that being fixed, even if you manage to have spell damage on board and play Grand Magus Antonidas, the effect is simply not good enough, as most decks want 100% guaranteed win conditions, which we talked about in another recent video. Not to mention that the Battlecry effect on the card comes with a big requirement that needs to be fulfilled. You need to have cast fire spells in each of your previous 3 turns in order for the Battlecry effect to activate. And that is frankly a ridiculous price to pay for 3 fireballs that are not even guaranteed to hit their opponent's hero. Do you know how many Hearthstone combos require 3 turns to set up? Not a lot. Most require maybe 1 or 2 turns at most, and then you basically win the game, which again brings me back to my point of Grand Magus Antonidas simply being too fair. The effect is cool, but you just don't win games. Not to mention that the requirement of Antonidas has a bit of anti-synergy with the draw engine, because on one hand you want to cast all your fire spells at once with Sanctum Chandler, and on the other hand you don't want to actually cast all your fire spells too quickly because you need to spread them out over 3 turns, which again makes the deck somewhat awkward to play. And here is my biggest gripe with the whole situation. The Grand Magus Antonidas fire deck was a new archetype. I get it, making a new archetype work with only 1 expansion worth of cards is a very difficult task, but the deck did not receive any major support in the next expansions and was basically left in the dust. And the concept was really cool. Such missed opportunities are really annoying because the new concepts of new archetypes that are being introduced in Hearthstone are super interesting. Then suddenly they do not get any new cards in the next expansion, and the next year, or maybe 2 years. You get the idea. To make things even worse, the power level increase that happens over a few expansions can be crazy. Antonidas has tough to fill requirements just so he can cast 3 6 damage fireballs. Then suddenly you have this guy, Astalor. The setup that the newer cards require is significantly smaller, and dealing massive amounts of damage with them is much easier. Then you look back at the Fire Mage deck and its big finisher, and you just see awkward to fill requirements, average draw engine, and payoff that is fair but not strong enough to compete with newer cards. I hope that things in the future will change. See you next time. Oh, and check out this Fire Mage game.